Well, hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to my overview of the Planet Crafter, specifically the Planet Humble DLC. So I ordinarily just do overviews on this channel, that's what this is. It's looking at the first 2 hours of the content, in this case the DLC, but I did review Planet Crafter earlier in the year if you want to check that out. But the long and short of it is, I think this game is excellent. It's very gamey, very mechanical, and I loathe putting it into that sort of open world survival craft category because it's just flooded by copy-paste trash, and I generally find myself rolling my eyes when I look at games in that space. This is much more of a hybrid of aspects of those, at least building, but with a focus towards terraforming, and that's one of my favorite little themes or subgenres. If something's got terraforming in it, I'm pretty much gonna play it. And you can play it, I've never actually played it multiplayer, but apparently that works quite well. But yeah, the idea is, at least for the base game, you just start on this red desert planet. Well, I guess there's other biomes, but that's all that really matters in the beginning. And your task at raising the terraforming index, which is broken up into a couple of different subcategories. You know, temperature, pressure, and oxygen, and you build out your base and you build these little generators essentially. And that's the hook to this game, is kind of trying to balance all three evenly, because at certain increments, because it kind of has an incremental component to it, at certain levels they will unlock new toys, right? New technology. So the loop in itself and building towards increasing all of these indexes is core to unlocking more technology. And you know, as you develop along the terraforming process, I don't really want to give it away, but you could probably figure it out if you had to think about it. You know, you start getting into more things like biodiversity and wildlife, that sort of stuff. So the markers and the milestones kind of open up, and before you know it, you have all these little satellite bases all over the planet, running around doing all your things and just watching it change. So that's the sort of blurb of what Planet Crafter is, and it's excellent. If you missed it, if you haven't played it, forget about this DLC, just go play the core game. Regarding this DLC, again, I've played 2 hours, and all it's really done is made me realize I just want to play more bloody Planet Crafter. Nothing wrong with this. In fact, this is exactly what it says on the box. It's another planet, kind of like an icy barren start. I think it's probably half the size of the core game, but that's still pretty respectable. But any bloody excuse to jump back in and play it again, because the core game, as I understand, it's not procedural. Everything's kind of, well, you could say handcrafted, but it fixed is probably the best way to do it. And there are some puzzly mechanics, almost Metroidvania, in that, you know, there will be frozen off entrances to other passageways, other areas that will in turn give you, you know, new technologies or new resources that you can unlock. But the only way to get through them is by raising the index of, say, the temperature so that it starts melting the passageway. So there's this progress gating that's worked into the game, and all of that's carried over here. This seems to have its own unique quirks to it. Now, it's been a while since I played Planet Crafter, but straight out of the gate with this, there's not really any ice nearby. That kind of took me off guard. You're more of in a barren wasteland area, and you kind of got to move beyond your comfort zone, probably beyond your initial oxygen tether range to get ice, which is important for survival mechanics, but we can talk about that. But that was just interesting. That's a little bit more advanced. I mean, it's not exactly going to break the bank mentally, but it feels like it's designed to shake up the start for a veteran player, let's say, right? So if you were jumping in, for whatever reason, maybe you prefer ice over desert or whatever, I would still recommend play the core game before you play this ice biome. Unless, of course, you got a bunch of mates and they're insisting on starting with ice first. But yeah, again, that's one of the things that sort of threw me for a loop, caught me a little bit off guard, is they've shook it up in a bit more of a tricky beginning. And from the perspective of someone who's already played through the core loop, it's more of a, aha, I see what you're doing. You're kind of making it a little bit more stretched. Now look, I could be totally wrong. I play a billion different games, but I'm pretty sure they've got a new mechanic straight away at the beginning, in that there's this ore crusher technology. So there's these new deposits that I don't remember seeing, dolomite, but there's also some other ones, bauxite and some sort of isotope type thing. But essentially they're like a little treasure chest of ores that you need to put through an ore crushing machine. And you start with this technology straight out of the gate. So a slightly different twist on the start. And essentially you load this machine up. It incentivizes you to make sure that your base is always powered, because you do want power, but when it drops out, it's not necessarily the end of the world normally. Well, this will switch off one of the timers that gets you some of the more rare resources. So that's kind of an interesting interplay. So yeah, you'll pick up dolomite in your travels, and it's a bit of a sort of delayed gratification type thing. Bring it back to base, load it up into the ore thing, make sure your base is powered at all times, and it will start spitting out 3 resources at a time, almost, dare I say, booster pack or loot boxy. So that's cool, it's a cool little wrinkle. But otherwise, it does kind of just follow the same bouncing ball from scratch. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I kind of feel like this is very clever. You're probably going to get your angry, entitled crowd that is going to be, oh, well, we wanted more content and blah, blah, blah. But I actually think a core of Planet Crafter, because this game really did go gangbusters and took off with quite a bit of popular uptick, I think this is just a really good excuse to twist the starting knobs a little bit, put you in a slightly different planet, a few different mechanics, but it's an excuse to go back to the beginning, arguably even to go back in with the boys. If you played it solo, maybe you can bully all your mates into playing with you again. So yeah, look, it's not the most robust thing at the look of it, but it also does seem to have a few little twists that I don't remember, which makes me wonder, maybe we're going to see some unusual and interesting biomes, and maybe a couple of different mechanics that weren't there originally, but that's all that matters. I also know that there's been some patches since I last touched it. I think there's rovers in it as well. So maybe you're like me and you do come back for this DLC, maybe because I brought you this video, but mixing in the content that's added here and the patches that have gone on since, I think it's the perfect time to go back and check this game out. I'll take a moment, because I might as well, to just discuss, because this was something I was marveling about. A bit of a second wave review as I was going through the motions once more. And it's kind of survival light, but the mechanics are built less from trying to emulate a survival experience and more about making a clever mechanical through line. To elaborate a little bit more, I use the facetious example of all these simulator games, wall painting simulator, right? And they tend to focus on, hypothetically making every mechanical part of painting a wall one-to-one into the game. And you end up with a kind of shit game. I mean, good for you, you simulated and gamified every moving part, but you kind of built it back to front. You didn't build it from the fundamentals of let's make a fun game first that happens to be a simulator game. A lot of them just don't get it. They think this is something that no one's done in the simulator market. I'm going to just do some shitty simulator mechanics and try and turn a profit. And that's the line that delineates the 90% trash simulator games from the 10% that were built from the ground up as a game first. And I go on this little tirade because that's what's kind of cool about the survival component specifically of Planet Crafter. So at the base level, you have something that's kind of reminiscent of Astroneer. I'll call it like an oxygen tethering situation. And you see it in something like Subnautica as well, might be another touchstone. But yeah, obviously there's no atmosphere on this planet that you're terraforming. You start with a fairly light on oxygen tank. You also got this little escape pod, starter base. There's not much you can do with it, very basic crafting, but the point is you've got infinite oxygen as long as you're tethered to it, as long as you stand in it. But you've got a little bit of operational range, let's call it 60 seconds, where you can go out, grab the close stuff, and bring it back. So you've got this obstacle, this almost Fermi paradox level first step that you need to overcome to get off the leash, as it were. It's very clever, and those games that I mentioned, they get it. Like, it's almost like seeing this kind of mechanic being implemented at the beginning of a game is a really good, let's call it a green flag, that the developer knows what they're doing. The further survival mechanics beyond that, because that becomes overcome through the course of just technology carrot on a stick, you will get better oxygen storage and tanks so you can, go further. But the next thing I would call short-term or short to mid-term survival, which is water. Water you're going to go through very quickly. And in this particular expansion, it's exacerbated because, like I said, ice is nowhere nearby. I believe in the core game, there's ice immediately there. And you can turn ice into water, but you still have to maintain and look after that. And in this one, you kind of have to overcome the oxygen tether a little bit faster so you can get your legs on and go find a little ice biome off to the side so you can start drinking water. So water kind of ticks down faster, and it's more of an intermediary, keep you honest, early problem. Again, another Fermi step, if you will. You need to source ice, you need to be making water, and you need to be thinking about carrying it with you. But that's about as far as it goes. Next comes food. You actually start with a lot of food, but food is more of the mid to long-term game, where you can actually get yourself in a lot of trouble because it's further down the tech tree, the ability to make food and grow food. And so it gets you thinking, you know, short, medium, and long-term survival milestones that create a really clever impetus in those opening hours. And by the time you're through those hours and you've used the stick and the carrot to get through those 3 cornerstones, you're hooked. The game owns you now. And I honestly feel like it's very cleverly constructed intentionally. And I just thought I'd give that as an example because the terraforming index is a whole other thing on top of that anyway. Look, I don't want to waffle and re-review the core game. Long story short, the DLC is just more of what's great about this, twisting the knobs a bit, you know, different color palette if you're feeling cynical, but the idea of coming back to this game on a different planet, I think will hook everybody back in that was hooked in the first place. Anyway, team, might just leave it there for the time being. I'll catch you guys on the next one.